When the black executive car pulled up in front of the luxury Mayfair townhouse, Kalen did something rare. He didn't wait for the chauffeur, but stepped out himself to grab my luggage. The early autumn breeze in London carried a sharp chill. He took off his bespoke suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. As his fingers brushed my collarbone, he paused for a fraction of a second before pulling his hand back and flashing me a picture-perfect smile. "Isolde, there's something we need to talk about," he said. His voice was incredibly soft and affectionate. A stark contrast to the ruthless managing director of Sterling Enterprises who could make his subordinates tremble in boardrooms. I swallowed a bitter scoff, keeping my eyes cast downward in feigned meekness. I simply tilted my head, putting on the face of a devoted wife waiting for her husband's words. "You know, we just landed that massive project in France, right?" He leaned comfortably against the boot of the car. He looked effortlessly handsome. "I want you to take this opportunity to get away for a bit. We've been married for 3 years and I never even gave you a proper honeymoon. Let's make up for it now." His tone was laced with just the right amount of guilt, like a man genuinely kicking himself for years of neglect. I stared into his eyes for 2 full seconds. Reflected in them was the image of a naive, trusting woman. His gaze seemed overflowing with tender love. If I hadn't already figured out the scheme brewing in his gut, I might have actually believed him. A trip overseas. I blinked, deliberately drawing out my words. "But what about you?" Kalen sighed and stroked my hair. The touch was so natural it almost gave me goosebumps. "The project is just kicking off. I can't leave the city right now. You go first. Enjoy yourself for a couple of weeks. As soon as I wrap things up here, I'll hop on a flight and join you, okay?" His hum was low and soothing, pitching up at the end as if coaxing a child. I looked down, nudging a stray pebble on the pavement with the tip of my heel. When I remained silent, he added another line, thinking I was upset. "Paris. You've always wanted to go. I already booked the hotel. It's a presidential suite with floor-to-ceiling windows looking right at the Eiffel Tower. You mentioned wanting to drink coffee by the Seine, didn't you? Consider this a scouting trip for us." How attentive. Remembering an offhand comment I made 3 years ago. If I hadn't accidentally found a custom wedding dress receipt in his suit pocket last month, I would have fallen for this act completely. The name on the receipt was Alara Thorne. Judging by the bust and waist measurements, she was a woman with a figure strikingly similar to mine. The order date was 3 months ago. In other words, he had been planning this for a quarter of a year. It took me 3 days to digest that reality, and another full week to dig up every dirty detail. Alara Thorne, 22 years old. A print and Instagram model newly signed to a subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises. The two met at a Cotswolds party 6 months ago, and since then, Kalen had been frequenting her luxury Kensington apartment under the guise of business meetings. The wedding was in 3 days. Saturday, the venue was a newly opened 6-star hotel in Canary Wharf. Rumor had it the scale was so grandiose that half the city's elite were invited, and the person who was supposed to find out last was me, Kalen's actual wife. No, according to Kalen's plan, I wasn't supposed to find out at all. He intended to finish the wedding, have his people scrub the internet and erase all traces, and fly to Paris the day before my scheduled return. When I got back, everything would be the same. He would still be my loving husband, and I would still be the clueless fool. He didn't even need to file a marriage certificate with Alara. Legally, the seat of Mrs. Sterling was still mine. He just wanted to give that girl the grand ceremony, or perhaps use it as the ultimate sick joke to humiliate me. Organizing these thoughts, I smiled. Not a wide grin, just enough to show a sliver of teeth, the compliant, gentle smile Kalen was most accustomed to. All right, then I'm going to spend a lot of money. Otherwise, I wouldn't be honoring the managing director's generosity. Kalen flinched slightly before breaking into a wide smile, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder, guiding me to the car door. I could hear the undisguised relief in his voice. "Spend it. Spend as much as you want. You have my black card. Buy everything you see. Don't hold back, okay?" "Okay," I replied shortly, ducking into the car. He closed the door and waved at me through the tinted window. As the car pulled away, I watched him through the rearview mirror. His smile faded instantly, replaced by a cold, blank expression. It was the face of a man who had just dodged a bullet. The chauffeur was a quiet, middle-aged man, and the car merged smoothly onto the A40 heading towards Heathrow. I leaned back into the leather seat, closed my eyes, and reviewed my entire plan. Kalen thought his strategy was flawless, but he had no idea. The executive assistant who booked his flights was my person. The front desk manager at the hotel he booked for the wedding had been having afternoon tea with me for the past 3 months. Even the co-owner of the bridal studio where Alara's dress was being tailored was my university flatmate. He thought he was giving me a ticket to Paris. What he actually gave me was 15 days of uninterrupted time to orchestrate his absolute ruin. When I returned, Kalen would realize that his wedding, his company, and his pathetic pride had all been reduced to a spectacular laughingstock. And he would be on his knees begging me for his life. The flight was at 4 p.m. When I arrived at Heathrow, Kalen's personal assistant, Secretary Thorne, was already waiting at the VIP entrance. He had been Kalen's right-hand man for 5 years, known for his flawless execution. Check-in, baggage drop, and fast-track security flowed like water. Mrs. Sterling, Thorne said, handing me my boarding pass with a slight bow. Mr. Sterling asked me to convey that a dedicated concierge will meet you upon arrival. You won't need to worry about a thing. I took the pass and curled my lips into a knowing smirk. Tell Kalen I said thank you. I didn't head straight to the gate. Instead, I walked into the first-class lounge. In a quiet corner sat a young woman with a sleek bob cut and dark-rimmed glasses, a silver laptop resting on her knees. Seeing me, she closed the laptop, stood up, and gave a brief nod. It was Lyra Vance, my university friend and co-owner of the bridal studio. I looked into it, Lyra said, sliding a printed photo across the table. Her tone was strictly business. The wedding venue for Saturday was moved from the grand ballroom to the top-floor Sky Garden. The guest list expanded to 180 people. Kalen invited 6 media outlets, but they're all under Sterling's corporate umbrella, so they won't publish anything reckless. She paused, pointing at the hem of the wedding dress in the photo. And Alara, she's coming in for her final fitting this afternoon with her bridesmaids. I picked up the photo. The snow-white dress pooled beautifully on the floor, the train heavily encrusted with seed pearls. It was exactly the sweet, ostentatious style Alara loved. Perfect. I flipped the photo over, placing it on the table, and stood up, adjusting my collar. Lyra, add something to that dress for me. Something small. A platinum cufflink. Lyra frowned, not understanding. I smiled at her. I knew exactly how cold that smile was. Like ice that wouldn't melt in February. Kalen's cufflink. The one I left in his car last time, sew it into the inner lining of the dress's waist. Somewhere completely out of sight. Secretly, on the day of the wedding, I would make sure the whole world knew that even the new bride's custom gown carried the undeniable mark of the legal wife. Lyra remained silent for a few seconds before nodding. Clean and efficient. The boarding announcement echoed through the lounge. I grabbed my handbag and turned towards the exit. Isolde, Lyra called out behind me, a rare trace of hesitation in her voice. Are you sure about this? Once you start, there's no turning back. I stopped walking but didn't turn around. The day that man placed another woman's wedding invitation next to our marriage certificate, there was no road back for us. I pushed open the lounge doors. The afternoon sun poured through the massive glass windows of the terminal. The flight to Paris would take off in 30 minutes, and in 3 days, Kalen Sterling's perfect life would be over. When the plane reached 30,000 feet, I turned on the screen in front of my seat. The flight time was estimated at 1 hour. Paris is 1 hour ahead of London. When I landed, it would be evening in France, and the countdown to Kalen's wedding would be exactly 3 days. The flight attendant approached with a warm smile and a meal cart. I waved her away. She tactfully retreated and drew the curtain to the first-class cabin. It was quiet, save for the low hum of the engines. I closed my eyes for a moment, then reached into my handbag and pulled out a second phone. It was rose gold. Lyra had given it to me last week. It contained a clean SIM card with no personal data attached. Its call history and inbox entirely empty. I made the first call. It rang 4 times before a deep male voice answered. Hello? Who is this? Solicitor Gideon, it's me. I took off my sunglasses, dropping my voice 2 octaves lower than usual. Isolde Vane. The line went dead silent. Silas Gideon was the corporate counsel for Sterling Enterprises. He had known me since the day I married Kalen, but he had never heard this tone from me. The Isolde he knew was always soft-spoken, polite, and slightly distant, like a woman speaking from behind frosted glass. That glass was now shattered. Mrs. Sterling, Silas's voice carried a probing edge. Why the new number? Does the managing director know about this? Kaylin doesn't know. I scoffed lightly, and I have no intention of telling him. Silas, I'm calling because I need you to do something. Go ahead. According to the current shareholder agreement of Sterling Enterprises, if a shareholder holding more than 15% initiates a hostile takeover and public tender offer, other shareholders must offer their shares to the initiator first if they can't find a third-party buyer within 15 business days. Is that correct? Silas was silent for nearly 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was noticeably tight. Mrs. Sterling, what exactly are you thinking? I stretched my legs out, settling into a more comfortable position, staring at the air conditioning vent above. My tone was as casual as discussing dinner plans. Nothing much, just inquiring. I currently hold 18% of Sterling Enterprises. If you add the 7% trust shares my father-in-law left me before he passed, that makes 25%. If I initiate the buyout now, how many days realistically does Kaylin have to find a white knight? The number hit the silence over the phone like a boulder dropped into a calm lake. I could hear Silas take a sharp breath. Mrs. Sterling, this isn't a game. Do you know what 25% means? The managing director himself only holds 32%. If you start this process, you are declaring an all-out proxy war against him. Of course I know. Kaylin's father, the old founder, had adored me. Everyone knew it. On his deathbed, the old man had held my hand and said, Isolde, Kaylin is arrogant and calculating. You have to be the anchor for this company. He probably never imagined that the shares he placed in my hands would become the weapon used to obliterate his son. Solicitor Gideon, I said slowly into the receiver, I didn't call to consult you on whether I should do this. I'm informing you that this is happening with or without you. Silence hummed over the line. The cabin's AC whirred. When do you want to initiate? Silas finally asked, a strange calmness washing over his voice. Saturday morning. 10 a.m. London time. Saturday? Silas paused. That's the day the managing director is getting. He swallowed his words. The silence that followed was electric. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he frantically pieced the puzzle together. The rumors from the bridal studio, the sudden business wedding, my sudden trip to Europe, and the impeccably timed hostile takeover. He realized the board was set. I knew everything, Mrs. Sterling. Silas's tone shifted completely. The caution was gone, replaced by a cautious reverence. I must remind you of one thing. Last month, the managing director mentioned to the board that he was negotiating a massive capital injection with Valerius Capital. If that money comes through, his voting power will be solidified through proxy contracts. Your 25% might not be enough to win. Valerius Capital. Hearing those words made me want to laugh out loud. Silas, do you happen to know who the managing partner of Valerius Capital is? Who is it? I heard something drop onto a desk on the other end. Probably Silas's pen. Lucian Valerius, the youngest shark in the City of London's financial sector. The man who quadrupled Valerius Capital's assets under management in 5 years. Famous for being utterly ruthless. No one knew that Lucian Valerius was my maternal half-brother, the son my mother had after she secretly remarried into the Valerius family. The Vane family kept it strictly confidential, and Kaylin was completely in the dark. Kaylin thought of Lucian merely as a cunning investor, unaware that every time they sat across the negotiating table, Lucian was acting out a script I had written. The capital injection was just a carrot I dangled to make Kaylin put his own neck in a thicker noose. Don't worry about Valerius Capital, I said simply. Just prepare the paperwork. I'll contact you when I need you. Understood. The tender offer will be filed exactly at 10 a.m. on Saturday. I hung up, placing the phone back into my bag. My next call was to Secretary Thorne. He had been with Kaylin for 7 years. The entire company thought Thorne was Kaylin's most loyal lapdog. What they didn't know was that my late father had recommended Thorne to Kaylin 7 years ago, after the Vane family fell from grace. I quietly planted Thorne into Sterling Enterprises and pushed him up to Kaylin's side. Thorne picked up on the first ring. Miss Vane, he said, using my maiden name. Did you get the guest list? Yes. Thorne lowered his voice. 183 people, 76 business partners, 42 Sterling relatives, and about 60 of Alara's friends. 6 media outlets. The encrypted list is in your inbox. 6 outlets, I repeated. Too few. We need at least 20 on Saturday. 20? Thorne sounded surprised. Miss, it's hard to secure that many on such short notice without raising suspicion. You don't need to invite them. Just send an anonymous tip to every major tabloid, news network, and social media outlet in London at 9 a.m. on Saturday. The headline: City tycoon marries mistress while legally bound to heiress wife. Thorne inhaled sharply. He's not calling it a wedding publicly. On the hotel registry, it's listed as a corporate gala to avoid bigamy charges. But if you expose it like this, I want him exposed, I interrupted. I want the whole city, every camera, every smartphone, every live stream, to know that the woman he's walking down the aisle with is a mistress. I'm going to turn his fairy tale wedding into a public execution. Understood, Thorne said. And one more thing. Alara's dress arrived this afternoon. Lyra told me to tell you that the item you requested has been securely sewn in. Good. I hung up. The boutique hotel in the 8th arrondissement of Paris was exquisite. Lyra had rebooked me here instead of the flashy place Kaylin had chosen. My windows opened to a stunning view of the Grand Palais. The moment I entered the room, I drew all the curtains, pulled out a black tablet from my suitcase, and connected to the encrypted VPN. When the screen flickered to life, it was 6:30 a.m. in London on Saturday morning. Less than 4 hours until the wedding. The tablet displayed a grid of live security feeds from the Canary Wharf Hotel. 6 cameras. The main ballroom, the bridal suite, the kitchen hallway, the lifts, the underground garage, and the lobby. Thorne had used his clearance with the hotel's AV team to hijack the feeds, and Lyra had encrypted the signal. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, leaned back on the velvet sofa, and watched the countdown to the apocalypse. At 6:40 a.m., the bridal suite door opened. Alara walked in wearing an ivory silk robe, her hair tied up loosely. Even through the grainy CCTV footage, her two-year-old youth was undeniable. She sat in front of the vanity mirror, smiling at her reflection. A smile full of nerves, excitement, and a smug sense of victory. She probably thought she had won. Won the rich, powerful man, the lavish wedding, and the title of Mrs. Sterling, beating out the old wife. She thought she was Kaylin's true love, the exception to his playboy rules. But she didn't know Kaylin. A man who could discard a 3-year marriage to throw a fake wedding could just as easily throw her away in another 3 days. He didn't love women. He loved control. At 7:30 a.m., the makeup artist began working on Alara. Downstairs in the ballroom, event planners in black waistcoats were scrambling, adjusting the lighting and the massive floral wall on the stage. White and blush pink roses formed a heart shape with gold acrylic letters reading, Kaylin and Alara. At 8 a.m., Kaylin appeared on the feed. He wore a dark, charcoal bespoke suit, his hair perfectly styled, his Oxford shoes polished to a mirror shine. Flanked by 2 tense assistants, he looked like he was walking into a high-stakes merger rather than a wedding. Before entering the ballroom, he stopped in the hallway and checked his phone. Simultaneously, my phone rang. Caller ID, husband. He couldn't help himself. 2 hours before his wedding, he was checking in on his legal wife to make sure she was safely tucked away in Paris. I let it ring 7 times before answering. Hello? I murmured, faking a sleep-heavy voice. Isolde. Kaylin's voice oozed honey. You've been in Paris for 2 days and haven't called once. I was starting to think you forgot about me. Adjusting to the time zone? Yeah, I said, watching him pace on the tablet screen. I injected a whiny, affectionate tone. Why are you up so early? It's Saturday. The line went quiet for a split second. I have a business event today. Need to get in early to prep. How's the weather? Did you go shopping? No, I fake yawned, too lazy. Just laying in bed. You told me not to hold back, so I'm ordering room service all day to bankrupt you. He chuckled deeply. The sound vibrating through the phone, mixed with his visual on the tablet, created a bizarre dissonance. Good, eat up. I'm busy, so I'll call you later. Okay, have a good day. I tossed the phone onto the sofa and picked up my coffee. I'll call you later, he had said. He had no idea that the next time he called me, his entire world would be on fire. At 9 a.m. sharp, Thorne texted. Anonymous tip sent. 14 new media outlets confirmed, plus the original 6. Total 20. 7 independent live streamers also confirmed. I replied with a single letter. K. At 9:20 a.m., chaos erupted on the CCTV. The head event planner took a phone call, turned pale, and sprinted out of the ballroom. Minutes later, the hotel's head of security rushed into the lobby feed. The hotel entrance was swarming with reporters. At least 50 people with massive cameras and boom mics were blocked by the revolving doors, camera flashes strobing relentlessly. At 9:35 a.m., Kalen's phone rang. Within 10 seconds, his face turned to stone. He barked an order to his assistants and stormed towards the lifts. The veins in his temples were pulsing. He finally realized his secret wedding was out of the bag. I set my coffee cup down, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. The Parisian morning sun flooded the room, turning the Eiffel Tower into a golden watercolor painting. Smiling, I walked back and switched the tablet feed to the underground garage. It was about to get fun. On the morning of the wedding, Alara Thorne received a text message from an unknown number. Dear Miss Thorne, due to an emergency power failure at the hotel, your wedding venue has been urgently relocated to the Blue Bay 1 luxury yacht. The vessel is docked at St. Catherine Docks, Pier 3. The event team is fully prepped. Please arrive by 9:30 a.m. We apologize for the inconvenience and have deployed extra staff to ensure a flawless ceremony. Hotel Events Management. Alara didn't know that the events management center didn't exist. Lyra had sent the text using a burner phone, and the Blue Bay 1 yacht was never part of Kalen's plan. He had booked the Sky Garden, but I had Thorne pour 4 liters of water into the hotel's main electrical room at 4 a.m., just enough to trip the breakers for the entire top floor without triggering the fire alarms. 6 hours to fix, more than enough time to derail a wedding. At 9:10 a.m., Alara's white Bentley arrived at St. Catherine Docks. She must have believed the text, or the driver paid off by Lyra simply took her there. Either way, she stepped out. Not into a hotel, but in front of a 118-m tri-deck luxury yacht capable of holding 300 guests. It was adorned with white roses and pink balloons. Alara had no idea the yacht belonged to a subsidiary of Valerius Capital. My brother had lent it to me for free. At 9:20 a.m., the first guest arrived, a VP from Sterling Enterprises. He looked bewildered, but when smiling attendants ushered him aboard, he signed the guest book without asking questions. Kalen was known for his flashy lifestyle. Moving a wedding to a yacht last minute seemed entirely on brand for him. By 9:40 a.m., over 150 of the 183 guests were on board. I watched it all through 12 high-definition cameras Thorne had discreetly installed on the yacht. Alara was in the top deck suite looking anxious, constantly dialing her phone, but Kalen wasn't answering. He was too busy fighting off the press at the hotel. The wedding planners on the yacht, hired by Lucian Valerius, were flawlessly executing the illusion. At 9:45 a.m., Kalen finally called someone, me. It was 10:45 a.m. in Paris, 9:45 a.m. in London, 15 minutes before his wedding was supposed to start. I answered lazily, hello? Isolde. Kalen's voice was tight, as if he were grinding his teeth. Where are you? At the hotel. I yawned again. Why? You sound weird. Silence for 2 seconds. He chose the safest route. No, just a minor issue with work. Everything good there? Perfect. Just ordered breakfast, French toast, and a latte. I'm heading out to shop soon. Is your event almost over? Yeah, almost. Great. I won't distract you. I hung up. Looking at the screen, Kalen was standing by the hotel garage lift. His suit rumpled, his tie askew. His assistants were frantically making calls. He was staring at a screenshot of the anonymous tip email. His jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might snap. At 10 a.m. sharp, the yacht's horn blasted 3 times. The Blue Bay ice slowly detached from the pier. The guests on the deck sipped champagne, completely unaware they were sailing on a floating execution block. Lyra texted me, Kalen just left the hotel, speeding towards the pier. I replied, let him come, Thorne texted. All 20 media outlets are set, live stream equipment online. External signal linked to the yacht's jumbotron. Lucian texted, I'm in position. I closed the chat windows and switched to the yacht's main deck feed. The cameras faced the expensive floral wall with the gold letters, Kalen and Alara. Kalen, I whispered to myself, sipping a warm cup of jasmine tea. Your good days are officially over. 20 minutes after the yacht left the dock, Kalen's Aston Martin screeched into St. Catherine Docks. He had driven like a madman. The brakes squealed against the concrete, the smell of burnt rubber filling the air. He burst out of the car. He looked less like a groom and more like a fugitive. His bespoke charcoal suit was wrinkled. His platinum tie clip, an heirloom he cherished, was crooked, and cold sweat beaded his forehead. By the time he reached the edge of the pier, The Blue Bay, I was a distant white speck on the River Thames. He grabbed one of the cleanup crew members by the collar. "Where's the wedding boat?" he roared, his voice like sandpaper. The worker pointed a trembling finger towards the water. Mr. Sterling, the ship already departed. The guests and the bride are on board. Who gave the order to leave? Didn't you, sir? A Mr. Lucian Valerius showed us the authorization papers. We verified them. Kalen let go. He stumbled back 2 steps. His lips trembled. The emotion in his eyes wasn't just rage. It was sheer terror. The realization of the hunted realizing they are the prey. The power outage, the venue change, the yacht. None of it was a coincidence. It was a perfectly designed trap. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed my number. In Paris, my phone buzzed. I didn't answer. I let it spin on the sofa cushion until it went to voicemail. When he called right back, I hit decline and sent a text. Shopping. Can't talk. What's wrong? He didn't call back, but it was too late anyway. On the deck of the Blue Bay 1, the wedding was in full swing. The MC, a famous London event host, held a gold microphone in front of the floral wall. Ladies and gentlemen, we are officially beginning the celebration for Kalen and Alara. Applause erupted. Over 100 guests cheered. The MC had smoothly explained away the groom's absence. Mr. Sterling is running slightly behind and will be arriving dramatically via speedboat. Let's get the party started. Lucian Valerius had paid the MC handsomely to sell that lie. Alara looked nervous but radiant. She stood by the railing, her white veil blowing in the wind. She had tried calling Kalen, but with hundreds of eyes on her, she had no choice but to play along. She believed Kalen would show up. She wanted this so badly. Guests complimented her, calling her Mrs. Sterling, and she blushed, soaking in the validation. At 10:35 a.m., the massive jumbotron on the yacht flickered to life. The MC was just asking the bridesmaids to give a speech when the microphone let out a piercing screech of feedback. Everyone covered their ears. The screen shifted from a blue standby screen to an image. It was a high-resolution scan of a custom bridal receipt. Client: Kalen Sterling. Date: 3 months ago. Bride: Alara Thorne. Designer: Lyra Vance. The deck fell dead silent. Whispers broke out. 3 months ago, Kalen was very publicly married to Isolde Vane. Alara's face drained of color. She stepped back instinctively. The wind caught the train of her heavy dress, flipping the inner lining outward. Right there, glinting in the sunlight, was a platinum cufflink. It was engraved with an elegant V-plank. The camera angle on the jumbotron zoomed in perfectly on the cufflink. Someone in the crowd gasped. What does V stand for? Vane. I sold Vane. Isn't she the managing director's wife? He sewed his wife's cufflink into the new bride's dress. What kind of psycho? Alara looked down at her waist. She clawed at the cufflink, trying to rip it out, leaving white scratch marks on the silk. But Lyra's stitching was industrial. It wouldn't budge. The bridesmaids backed away, unsure what to do. The screen changed again. The second photo was a UK marriage certificate. Kalen Sterling and Isolde Vane. Legally married. No record of divorce or annulment. The third photo, Kalen and Alara at a party 6 months ago. His hand low on her waist, her head on his shoulder. The final image was stark white text on a black background, sharp as a legal summons. The marriage between Kalen Sterling and Isolde Vane remains legally binding. Today's ceremony, the crime of bigamy. For 5 seconds, the yacht was a graveyard. The wind blew white rose petals from the floral wall onto Alara's frozen figure. They looked less like confetti and more like funeral paper. Then the dam broke. 20 journalists surged up from the lower deck. Cameras, flashes, and microphones surrounded the main deck like a swarm of locusts. 7 live streamers pointed their phones at Alara. The live chat on the screen scrolled so fast it was a blur. City of London Managing Director commits bigamy. Mistress wears first wife's cufflink. Sterling Enterprises fraud. And back at St. Catherine Docks, Kalen stood paralyzed, staring at the empty river. His phone rang. It was Secretary Thorne, his voice shaking. Sir, the media just went live. The whole world is watching. The marriage certificate is already trending #1 on Twitter. Kalen dropped his phone. The cold river breeze whipped his tailored suit. He stood there like a crumbling statue. In Paris, I closed the tablet feed. I picked up my phone and texted Lucian. Time for the final act. Lucian's reply was instant, already in motion. On the yacht, the Jumbotron flickered again. This time, it played a crystal-clear video recorded in the boardroom of Valerius Capital. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the London skyline. Lucian Valerius sat at the head of the table in a sharp navy suit, his gold-rimmed glasses gleaming. Valerius Capital, Lucian's voice rang out, cold and authoritative, has officially decided to terminate all strategic investments and funding negotiations with Sterling Enterprises. We have 3 reasons for this immediate withdrawal. The business partners on the yacht began to panic. Half the executives were there specifically because of the Valerius Capital merger. First, Managing Director Kalen Sterling committed corporate fraud by hiding his legal marital status during our negotiations. Second, Mr. Sterling is currently facing criminal charges for bigamy. We do not partner with entities holding such severe legal liabilities. Third, Valerius Capital is initiating a comprehensive audit of Sterling's existing debts. Given the non-disclosure of his marital assets, several commercial loans will be called in immediately. Lucian took off his glasses and looked directly into the camera. He offered a razor-thin smile. On a personal note, Lucian added, his voice dropping to a deadly chill. Everything Kalen Sterling has done to my sister, Isolde Vane, I will repay tenfold. The video ended. The deck exploded. Sister? Isolde Vane is Lucian Valerius's sister? Sterling married the sister of the most ruthless shark in the city, tried to screw her over and asked him for money? Sterling Enterprises is dead. Sell the stock right now. I watched the trending topics from my hotel room. Kalen Sterling bigamy. Valerius Capital withdraws. Sterling stock plummets. But it wasn't over. The screen lit up one last time. It was a live video feed of solicitor Silas Gideon sitting in his City of London office, surrounded by legal volumes. Shareholders of Sterling Enterprises, Silas said calmly. I am Silas Gideon, corporate counsel. I am issuing a formal notice. At 10 a.m. today, Miss Isolde Vane, holding 25% of Sterling shares, officially launched a hostile public tender offer. As the largest single voting bloc, she intends to assume majority control of the company. This was the killing blow, 25%. Kalen only had 32%. If Isolde acquired just 8% more, she would oust Kalen and take the company. In less than an hour, the commercial empire Kalen had spent 13 years building was reduced to ash. The guests were scrambling. People were dialing their brokers, shouting orders to dump Sterling stock. Alara was left entirely alone by the floral wall. Even her bridesmaids had retreated to the other side of the deck. She finally realized she wasn't brought here to be a bride. She was brought here to be a target. At 1:05 p.m., the Blue Bay I docked back at St. Catherine Docks. The pier was swarming with police, reporters, and onlookers. Kalen was standing at the front. His suit looked like it had been dragged through dirt, his tie ripped off, his shirt unbuttoned to reveal a sweat-soaked undershirt. Alara stumbled down the gangway. Her dress was muddy, her makeup smeared with tears. She paused in front of Kalen, her lips moving, but no words came out. Kalen didn't even look at her. He was staring over her head, right at Lucian Valerius, who was casually leaning against the yacht's railing, swirling a glass of champagne. Lucian raised the glass in a mocking toast. Kalen lunged forward, but 6 massive bodyguards in black suits immediately blocked his path. Kalen's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. He forced out a raspy, broken croak. Isolde. Lucian looked down at him. Kalen, the question you should be asking right now isn't where my sister is. It's how you're going to survive the night. My phone rang. Caller ID, husband. This time I answered. I didn't say a word. I just listened to his heavy, ragged breathing over the receiver. It sounded like a trapped animal. In the background, I could hear the press screaming questions. Mr. Sterling, any comments on the bigamy charges? Isolde. He said my name. Not darling, not babe, just my name. Sharp and cold. Stop this joke. His voice was a mess of fury, disbelief, and pure terror. For 3 years, he had crafted the perfect persona. Elite managing director, loving husband, winner. In half a day, I had smashed it to pieces. I leaned back on the sofa, twirling the phone cord around my finger. I chuckled. You have a funny way of speaking, Kalen. A joke? You told me to go to Paris. I'm just enjoying the view. How is this a joke? Don't play dumb, he roared, his voice cracking. Why didn't you tell me Lucian Valerius is your brother? Whose yacht is that? What about the investment? Tell me, Kaylin. What did you just ask me? Why I didn't tell you about my brother? I took a slow sip of tea. Let me ask you something. When were you going to tell me you were marrying Ilara Thorne? Dead silence. You spent £1,200,000 on that girl's wedding dress, but you bought me a £2,000 coat and acted like you handed me the moon. You rented out the Sky Garden for her and shipped me off to a hotel in Paris, calling it a honeymoon. Kaylin, every gift you gave me was bought with my own trust fund. You paved the road for your mistress using my money. And the cufflink you're wearing today, I picked that out in Milan last year. Yet you wore it to marry another woman. Who's the worst person here? I heard a crash through the phone. He must have dropped it or slammed it against the pier but picked it up again. You think you've won? His voice was eerily low now. You think having Lucian pull funding and Silas launch a takeover will ruin me? I built Sterling Enterprises with my bare hands. I will bounce back. But you, without me, you're nothing. You're just a socialite who lives off my name. What are you going to fight me with? I laughed softly. Kaylin, do you remember my engagement ring? He paused, thrown by the sudden shift in topic. I never took it off, not in the shower, not when I slept, not even the first time you didn't come home. I thought it was proof of our marriage. My voice dropped to a featherlight whisper. But guess what? The diamond was fake. You swapped it for moissanite. You sold the real diamond to fund Ilara's studio. You thought I wouldn't notice because you never even looked at me long enough to care. You never treated me like a wife, Kaylin. So why should I treat you like a husband? A dull thud echoed through the phone. It sounded like he had dropped to his knees on the concrete. Minutes passed. Finally, he spoke, his voice completely broken. A desperate, gravelly plea. Isolde, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, tell Lucian to stop. We can talk. The company can't fall. If Sterling goes under, you get nothing too. Let's just talk. Before he could finish, I heard Secretary Thorne's frantic voice in the background. Sir, the Metropolitan Police are here. Someone was reading him his police caution. Grand larceny, wire fraud, bigamy. Kaylin, I said calmly. You said I was a parasite who couldn't live without you. Watch closely. Let's see who the real parasite is. I hung up. When my flight touched down at Heathrow on Monday morning, it was I hadn't slept a wink. My phone was buzzing like a trapped hornet. First message from Thorne. Bail denied. Kaylin is in HMP Wandsworth on remand. The Crown Prosecution Service cited extreme flight risk and evidence tampering. Second from Lyra. Your office is ready. Top floor. Sterling Tower. I stared at the messages, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. A black Maybach was waiting at the arrival's curb. The chauffeur was an old man named Arthur Waite. Let's call him Henry. Henry had been the Vane family's loyal chauffeur before we lost everything. I had Thorne track him down last week. Mrs. Olda, Henry said, his eyes welling up with tears. It's been a long time, Henry. I smiled. At 9 a.m. sharp, the Maybach pulled up to Sterling Tower in the financial district. The massive LED screen above the entrance still flashed the corporate logo, but the Sterling family flags had been quietly lowered. The security guards stepped aside when they saw me. The lobby receptionist nearly dropped her coffee. Mrs. Sterling, she stammered. I gave her a curt nod and stepped into the private executive lift. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, 20 department heads were lined up in the hallway. Finance, marketing, HR, everyone. They stared at me with a mix of terror, curiosity, and awe. These were the same people who had treated me like a ghost for 3 years. Now, the woman they ignored was walking past them in foreign heels, her steps echoing sharply against the marble. At the end of the hall was the managing director's office, Kaylin's office. I pushed the door open. Lucian was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk, sipping espresso. Look who it is. The Queen arrives, he smirked. I took the coffee from him, took a sip, and sat in the chair opposite the desk. Lucian slid a manila folder towards me. Share transfer agreement. On Friday, the day Kaylin was arrested, Silas Gideon executed the hostile takeover. Combined with the 32% we seized from Kaylin's frozen assets and minority shareholders who panicked and sold, I now legally own 51% of Sterling Enterprises. I took a Mont Blanc pen and signed my name, Isolde Vane, not Sterling. Lucian put on his suit jacket, his playful demeanor shifting to strictly business. He opened the office door. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the executives in the hall, the new chairwoman of the board will see you now. The boardroom was packed. I sat at the head of the table. Silas Gideon sat to my left, Lucian to my right. Thorn stood by the door. "I'll make this brief," I said, my voice cutting through the dead silence. First, Kalen Sterling has been removed from his position as managing director by the board, effective immediately. Second, as the 51% majority shareholder, I am assuming the role of managing director. I leaned forward, interlacing my fingers. Third, regarding your futures, I am not here to execute a purge. The company needs stability. Those of you who did your jobs cleanly over the last 3 years have nothing to worry about. However, several executives flinched. If any of you assisted Kalen in embezzling company funds, cooking the books, or laundering money through shell companies, you have 3 days to come to my office and confess. If you do, I will consider not pressing charges. I smiled. I let their imaginations do the rest. After the meeting, I returned to the managing director's office. I sat in Kalen's heavy leather chair. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Thorn. "Miss Vane," Thorn said nervously. "Balthazar Sterling is downstairs. Kalen's father. He brought about 10 people. Solicitors, relatives, and some blokes who look like hired muscle. Balthazar Sterling, the founder. The man who destroyed my father 20 years ago." "Send him up," I said, tapping my manicured nails against the desk. 5 minutes later, the door slammed open. Balthazar stood there, leaning heavily on a custom mahogany cane. He wore a sharp old money tweed suit. His silver hair perfectly slicked back. His face was purple with rage. "Isolde!" he bellowed, slamming his cane onto the carpet. "You dare sit in the Sterling seat with an outsider's name?" I didn't stand up. I didn't even blink. I just smiled. "An outsider's name? Balthazar? The title to this building? The chair you're yelling at? Even the carpet you're standing on legally? It all belongs to me now." I stood up slowly, planting my hands on the desk. "Shall I read you a list of the felonies your beloved son committed?" Balthazar froze. I opened a file Silas had prepared. Last year, Kalen wired £320,000 to Alara Thorne's PR agency, a shell company that doesn't exist. Wire fraud. 2 years ago, he siphoned £1,200,000 to an offshore account in the Caymans under Alara's brother's name. Grand larceny. Would you like me to hand this over to the FCA, Balthazar? Or do you want to read it first? Balthazar stumbled back. His solicitor caught his arm, whispering frantically in his ear. The solicitor was telling him the truth. If these files went to the National Crime Agency, Kalen wasn't looking at bigamy. He was looking at 20 years in high-security prison. Balthazar stared at me, his eyes suddenly looking incredibly old. "What do you want? I'm going to run this company better than Kalen ever did. As for your son, if he committed crimes, he does the time. Isn't that what you said at the company gala 3 years ago? No one is above the law?" Balthazar couldn't speak. He turned and hobbled out of the office, his entourage scurrying behind him like beaten dogs. I looked down at my phone. 3 messages. Silas, court date set, 20 days. Lyra sent a photo. Alara's wedding dress dumped in a rubbish bin by the pier, covered in mud. Unknown number. Don't get cocky, Isolde. You know how your father died. You wouldn't want that getting out. I stared at the text message. The sunlight from the window illuminated the thread on my screen. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Kalen, you finally played your last card. I stared at the message for 3 minutes. You know how your father died. It was a burner number, but I knew exactly who sent it. Very few people knew the truth about my father, Jonathan Vane. The Metropolitan Police ruled his death a suicide when he jumped off a building 20 years ago. But those inside the circle knew it wasn't that simple. And the only person desperate enough to use this against me was Kalen, currently sitting in HMP Wandsworth. He probably had his solicitor smuggle a message out to a loyalist. He thought this was his trump card. He didn't realize I had built the entire game board specifically for him to play it. I pressed the intercom. Thorn, bring Silas and Lucian to my office in 30 minutes. When Silas arrived, he unzipped his briefcase and laid a massive stack of documents on my desk. Everything is here, Miss Vane. Jonathan Vane's banking records from 20 years ago, phone logs, his movement tracker up to 3 days before the incident, and the original forged debt transfer contract signed by Balthazar Sterling. He pulled out a yellowed, sealed envelope from the bottom. And this is the core evidence. The letter your father left you a week before he died. I've kept it in a safety deposit box. I took the envelope but didn't open it. I had memorized every word. It was my father's suicide note. It detailed exactly how Balthazar Sterling had fabricated debts, used shell companies to bleed the Vane Group dry, and forced my father into a corner to steal his empire. I had hidden this letter for 3 years. Kalen thought he was threatening me with a secret. He didn't know the secret was a loaded gun pointed directly at his father's head. Lucian walked in, took one look at the desk, and whistled. Setting the final trap, I see. I showed Lucian the text message. His face hardened. Don't bother. I smiled. He took the bait. Now we reel him in. Lucian, I need you to leak a rumor to Kalen's camp. Tell them I have my father's suicide note and that I'm planning to release it to the press on the day of Kalen's trial. Lucian paused, then grinned. You're showing him your hand to make him panic. Exactly. A cornered rat will do anything. Let him dig his own grave. 2 days later, Thorne knocked on my door. Miss Vane, Kalen's barristers just filed an emergency motion with the court. They're requesting bail on the grounds that the defendant has critical whistleblower evidence regarding an unsolved homicide. I put my pen down. My smile widened. Kalen was trying to pin my father's death on someone else, maybe even frame me or my mother to secure a plea deal and bail. It was pathetically predictable. The judge denied bail, but forwarded the claim to the Metropolitan Police. Thorne continued. Detectives just contacted Silas. They want you to come in for questioning. Let's go, I said, grabbing my coat. Tell Silas to bring the files. The meeting didn't happen at a police station. It happened in a secure conference room on the ground floor of Sterling Tower. 2 plainclothes detectives sat across from me. Miss Vane, the older detective said, we received a tip from Kalen Sterling claiming your father, Jonathan Vane, was driven to his death through foul play involving corporate disputes. Do you have anything to say about this? The room was dead silent. I didn't cry. I didn't act hysterical. I nodded at Silas. Silas slid the yellowed envelope across the table. This is the original suicide note written by Jonathan Vane. It details exactly how Balthazar Sterling fabricated an £80 million debt to bankrupt the Vane Group and seize their assets. It is a textbook case of grand larceny, extortion, and corporate fraud. The detectives opened the letter. My father's elegant handwriting spilled across the page. Isolde, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Balthazar Sterling forged the debt contracts to steal 70% of Vane Group. The banks are demanding £80 million. I never borrowed. He told me if I didn't surrender, he would make sure you and your mother never saw the light of day. I'm not afraid to die, but I'm afraid for you. Don't seek revenge. Just live well. Far away from the Sterlings. The older detective looked up. His expression completely changed. Why didn't you bring this forward earlier, Miss Vane? I was waiting for the right moment, I said evenly. 3 years ago, when Kalen Sterling proposed to me, I knew why. The Sterlings needed my signature to finally clear the title on the last piece of Vane land. I married him because it was the only way to get inside their house and find the proof. Silas pushed the massive stack of binders forward. Inside these binders are 20 years of Balthazar Sterling's offshore bank routing numbers, fake ledgers, and wire transfers. The statute of limitations for the civil fraud may be complex, but the corporate wire fraud and criminal extortion tied to the Cayman accounts are still viable. The detectives exchanged a look. The older one made a phone call. I heard him say, "We need the NCA on this. The Sterling amount is staggering." He turned back to me. "We're taking these files. If this is verified, Balthazar Sterling is looking at a high court indictment." After they left, Silas leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Checkmate. Kalen trying to rat you out just gave the authorities the jurisdiction to raid his father. I looked out the window at the bustling London streets. It was time for a visit to the Cotswolds. The Sterling estate in the Cotswolds sat on 40 acres of prime real estate. Wrought iron gates, a long gravel driveway lined with imported European oak trees. When my Maybach pulled up, the estate manager hesitated but opened the gates. I walked into the mansion with Silas trailing behind me. We found Balthazar Sterling in his mahogany-paneled study. He looked like a corpse. He was wearing a rumpled cashmere cardigan, nursing a tumbler of scotch. The fire in the hearth cast long, flickering shadows over his face. "What do you want now?" he croaked, his hand trembling as he held the glass. I sat in the leather wingback chair opposite him. Silas placed a single document on the desk. Indictment notice. Criminal fraud and extortion. They're coming for you, Balthazar, I said softly. The Met Police and the NCA. Balthazar's face went gray. You married my son just for this? For revenge? Not revenge, I corrected him, my voice chillingly calm. Debt collection. 20 years ago, on the day my father jumped off that building in the pouring rain, you came to our house. You told my mother we had 30 days to pack our bags and get out. My mother worked her fingers to the bone in a tiny flat in Tower Hamlets until her liver failed. Before she died, she told me, "If you can't let it go, take back what is ours." I leaned forward. I want the Sterling Empire. The voting shares are mine. But I want the shell companies. I want the 4 offshore accounts in Switzerland. I want the family trust in the Caymans, and I want the deed to this estate. Balthazar shot up, his eyes bulging. You're insane, am I? I tilted my head. I'm just taking back the principal with 20 years of interest. Sign the transfer deeds to the trusts, Balthazar. If you do, I'll have Silas negotiate a plea deal so you can spend your last few years in a minimum security medical facility instead of a high security prison. Balthazar collapsed back into his chair. He looked at the fire, the fight entirely drained from his body. With a shaking hand, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a brass key. He unlocked a hidden safe behind a bookshelf and pulled out a stack of red folders. The offshore trusts, the deeds. Have the transfer papers ready by tomorrow, I told Silas. I stood up, turning my back on Balthazar. As I reached the door, I looked over my shoulder. 20 years ago, my mother told you that God was watching what you did. I don't know if God was watching, Balthazar, but I was. The day of Kaylin's trial, I didn't wear black. Black is for mourning, and his old Vane had nothing to mourn. I wore a custom pearl white tailored suit. It shimmered slightly under the courtroom lights, like the impenetrable inside of an oyster shell. Lyra stood next to me in the gallery, adjusting my collar. Kaylin hired the best defense barrister in London, she whispered. I didn't reply. The gavel banged. Everyone stood. When Kaylin was brought out in handcuffs, he looked skeletal. The prison jumpsuit hung off his frame. His jaw was covered in a dark scruff. He scanned the gallery until his eyes locked onto mine. His pupils dilated. I offered him a faint, polite smile. The prosecutor read the charges. Bigamy, wire fraud, grand larceny, embezzlement. Combined, he was facing 20 years. Kaylin couldn't take it. He turned his head entirely towards me, mouthing 3 silent words through trembling lips. I am sorry. I looked down at my bare ring finger. I thought of the moissanite ring he gave me, which I had tossed into the River Thames the night before. When the court recessed, reporters swarmed the steps of Southwark Crown Court. The flashbulbs were blinding. Microphones were shoved into my face. Miss Vane, what are your thoughts on your husband's trial? I stopped on the marble steps. The crowd instantly hushed. The autumn wind caught the lapels of my white suit. I smiled at the cameras. I have no thoughts on the trial, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the plaza. I am merely acting on behalf of my mother to reclaim what belongs to the Vane family. I paused, looking up at the crisp, blue London sky. The Vane legacy was never destroyed. It just had a change of management. As of today, Sterling Enterprises no longer exists. We are officially rebranding back to the Vane Group. I stepped through the sea of flashes and walked down the steps towards the waiting black Maybach. The roar of the journalists faded into a dull hum as Lucian opened the car door for me. Where to, Madam Managing Director? Lucian grinned, slipping behind the wheel. I took off my sunglasses, leaned back into the plush leather, and closed my eyes. Take me to Tower Hamlets. I have a plaque to hang on an old flat door. The engine purred to life. The Maybach merged into the endless river of London traffic, driving straight into the sun.